What I'll try to explain in these 10 minutes is what we are doing in the Commission to actually come about preparing, writing down, sit down at the desk and preparing a non-toxic environment for the European Union. So the first thing that we will look at is the goal. What is the goal? The goal that was set in front of us has already been mentioned. The 7th EAP is the decision by the Parliament and the Council adopted in 2013, in which it has set a general union environment action program until the year 2020. And there, in this program, we have a vision that has been decided amongst our legislators for 2050. And the vision that we have for us and the European citizens is that in 2050 we live well within the limits, within the planet's ecological limits. Our prosperity and health and healthy environment stem from an innovative circular economy where nothing is wasted and where natural resources are managed sustainably and the biodiversity is protected, valued and restored in ways that enhance our society's resilience. Our low carbon growth has long been decoupled from resource use, setting the pace for safe and sustainable global society. So it's a very general, very visionary goal that we want to achieve in 2050, in which I think all of us here present today, we can feel related and we can feel that, yes, we would like to be there by 2050. But it says more things. It sets the goal for the non-toxic environment. The reason why we're here today is because of this nice paragraph in the 7th EAP. It's a goal to be achieved by 2020, so it's around the corner. That's the bad news. It's the good news also, but it's also bad news for us because we have a lot of work to do. And it's aimed to tackle the environmental pressures and risks from the use of chemicals. And basically what the 7th EAP says that we need to take action in a number of key priority areas. We need to look at the combination effects of chemicals and the safety concerns on endocrine disruptors. We need to look at the risks for the environment and health, in particular in relation to children, that are associated with the use of hazardous substances, including chemicals in products. And we have to take long-term actions with a view to reaching the objective of a non-toxic environment. So this will require, in particular, that we develop this union strategy, what we are here trying to come into grips with, that it's conducive to innovation and the development of sustainable substitutes, including non-chemical solutions, that they will ensure the safety of manufactured nanomaterials, the minimization of exposure to endocrine disruptors, address the combination effects of chemicals, and minimize exposure to chemicals in products. This will lead us, the chemicals in products will focus on having non-toxic material cycles and reducing the indoor pollution. But the 7th EAP says more things about chemicals. It says that REACH and CLP, which are our basic horizontal regulations on chemicals, provide a good baseline of protection in the European Union. It also says that, we need to increase our efforts if we want to attain the World Summit Sustainable Development Goals for 2020, which is to minimize the adverse effect of chemicals. We need to develop a comprehensive approach to children and vulnerable groups. We also need to develop a comprehensive chemical exposure and toxicity knowledge base, which will draw data generated preferably without animal testing, and that the EU has to continue a coordinated approach to human and environmental biomonitoring. So how do we go about achieving all these goals? And I think that's the question why we are here today. Obviously, I don't have the full response, because otherwise we wouldn't be here today. So, as I said, I'm the hardcore policy person. So in order to do this, in order to know how to build a non-toxic environment strategy, first we need to take a stock, where we are in terms of regulation and what have we already there to protect us, the environment and the citizens from the risk of chemicals. And this we are doing currently in the European Union through two main initiatives, which are the REACH Refit evaluation and the fitness check of all chemicals legislation, but REACH. Both activities are framed under the Better Regulation Program of the Commission. The purpose of this Better Regulation Program is not very different of how we did things before. We also in the past made impact assessments before we put legislation in place. We also in the past had exposed evaluations of the legislation we had in place to see whether they were working well, what needed to be changed, if it was efficient, it was effective. Now we are doing the same thing, but in a structured way, within a structured program, which gives a lot of opportunities, but at the same time, straitjackets your actions. So the purpose of better regulation, at the end of the day, is that we design the EU policies to achieve their objectives at the minimum cost. So we have to prepare policy and implement it and review it in an open and transparent manner. So as I said, basically what we did before, but more in a more structured manner. So during EU action, which is where we are now, with REACH and with CLP and with other pieces of environmental legislation on chemicals and internal market legislation on chemicals, we need, after a sufficient period of time of implementation, to evaluate their performance against a certain number of objectives. And these objectives are to assess the overall effectiveness, efficiency, relevance and coherence, and EU added value of the legislative framework, including the procedures to implement such framework, and to identify possible excessive regulatory burden, overlaps, inconsistencies, obsolete measures, and gaps. This structured way of working has certain bodies, like the REFIT platform, through which citizens can bring in their issues. It goes for stakeholder consultations, and it has a regulatory scrutiny board that at the end of the day will locate all the work that is done by the services. Under this REFIT program, you can either do an evaluation of a specific piece of legislation, which is what we are doing with REACH, or a fitness check of a group of legislation. And that's what we are doing with CLP and all the other pieces of chemicals-related legislation. Both exercises are evidence-based. So we prepare studies, we will prepare a report, but we also do stakeholder consultations and public consultations. So that's what we are doing for REACH and the other pieces of chemicals legislation. In both cases, you need to adopt a roadmap, which is published. In both cases, it was published in May this year, and you have a public consultation. The public consultation on the fitness check already took place, the one on REACH not, and both will be finished by 2017. The REACH one is expected for June 2017, and the fitness check by the end of the year. But there is also another initiative that has come in the Commission, which is the initiative on circular economy. So the Commission adopted in December 2015 a communication on circular economy that set an ambitious package on how to transform the European economy from a linear economy into a circular one. As part of the package, we have to look into some chemicals-related aspects, and in particular to develop a strategic approach on chemicals, which includes, amongst others, a commitment to analyze and propose options on the interface between chemicals, product, and waste legislation, including how to reduce the presence and improve the tracking of chemicals of concerns in products. So these activities under the circular economy program will provide us insights on the road that we need to take for achieving those non-toxic material cycles of the 7th EAP, but also on how to reduce the exposure to chemicals in products. But in order to know where we need to go, in order to achieve that general goal of the non-toxic environment, where we are building the non-toxic environment strategy, we need to set objectives. We need to set objectives, identify individual objectives that will be expressed in a way that would allow us, as policymakers, to evaluate whether we are achieving our goal. I'm not saying at all that they need to be quantifiable, but they need to be concrete in terms of measuring our evolution towards that goal that we need to achieve. These objectives also will allow us, a great opportunity for us, to set the ambition level and the priorities that we're going to have for the non-toxic environment. Once we have the goals and we know where we are, we identify the challenges and the gaps. So we need to see we've seen how our legislation is performing, and we see where the legislation is not performing very well. So what do we need? And we do this through the two better regulation exercises. So we can then come to the conclusion that we can achieve our objectives through existing legislation by complying or maybe enforcement of those objectives that were already set when adopting existing legislation. Or maybe we need to amend that legislation. We've seen that some provisions are not functioning well enough, so we need to maybe amend some of our legislation. So, for example, can we regulate the challenges posed by nanomaterials, achieve their safety, which is what we need to do through existing legislation? Is an amendment of the REACH annexes enough for that, or not? Do we need better enforcement to achieve those goals? We know that the provisions in REACH on substance and articles, meager as they are not very well enforced with. Do we need proper enforcement of that? What about endocrine disruptors? Are the criteria, we've heard what the minister thought about our criteria already this morning, but are the criteria the Commission is proposing enough? And also the uptake of those criteria in other pieces of legislation, is that going to be satisfactory enough? Do those criteria need to be taken up in other pieces of legislation? Are they really horizontal or not? So are they hazard-based, so as it's called upon in the 7th AP? So those are the questions that we will need to reply once we take a stock and we identify our objectives, in order to see which gaps and challenges we need to achieve. Can we create the non-toxic material cycles with the chemicals legislation, the product legislation, and the waste legislation that we have today? Or we need to amend it, or we need to supplement it. Do we need an additional piece of legislation for the non-toxic material cycles, or on substances in articles? The same goes for mixtures, which is one of the most commonly presented prevailing gaps in chemicals legislation. And we heard this morning how maybe in order to tackle really mixture toxicity, we need to look at risks in a very different manner. Once we've identified the gaps and the challenges, which we also hope that you will help us do, we'll have to build a path. And our final outcome, we will see as a way of communication from the Commission with a staff working document. It will frame the problems, the challenges to be addressed. We'll have a long-term vision. And it set the overall objectives and milestones, and it could contain policy measures, whether they are long, short-term, medium-term, etc. To help us do all of this, we are carrying out a study that contains within it several sub-studies focusing on the main areas that were identified in the non-toxic environment strategy, in the 7th AP, and those areas that we consider they are more of concern. And with that, I arrive to my conclusions. So I think we all see that we have a very solid regulatory framework. As it was said this morning, REACH is one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation regulating chemicals in the world. But we also need to work beyond this. We need to maybe work with achieve better implementation, but also see what it's beyond. REACH and CLP might not be enough, and whatever we have already now on plant protection products and biocidal product regulations might not be enough to achieve the goals of the non-toxic environment. So by 2017, we'll really know how fit for purpose our legislation is. But the most important thing is that the establishment of the non-toxic environment strategy is a great opportunity for all of us, not only for us in the Commission, but for all of you as regulators, but also companies and stakeholders, to set the level of ambition that we want on chemicals legislation for the future. This is the time to do it. If we use the opportunity now, we can really make things change for the future. And for all that, we need your help. So I'm very happy that we're having this conversation today. And I hope that a great report will come out of it that will show us the light to all of us, and that the conversation is not finished here, obviously. So thank you very much.
Cristina, thank you.